to Matador Memories. I'm your host, Carmen Ramos Chandler. As you recall, Matador Memories is a podcast that explores the history of California State University, Northridge, its people, places, and events. And with me today, we are so honored to have Bob Hilburn. Now, most of you may know him as the legendary music and pop critic for Los Angeles Times, but for us at CSUN, he's one of the original Matadors. So welcome, Bob. We are so honored to have you with us today.
That's great. And I wore in honor of my affection. And I also do a radio show at Wednesdays at midnight.
Yes, you do.
Rock and roll, kind of just like the stuff I used to write about at the LA Times. And it's a wonderful exposure. But it's so nice to be with you. You have a great spirit. It was nice walking across campus. It's a great day.
Now, don't forget, his show is on 88.5, the SoCal Sound. You can listen in the archives if you're not young enough to stay up to midnight.
I don't listen at midnight. I listen there.
When did you first come to CSUN, and why did you end up at CSUN?
Well, I lived on 6 blocks from here. Okay, I went to Birmingham High School, then I went to Reseda High School, and then so it was expected in those days you go to college. Okay, and my dad had gone to Berkeley, and he really wanted me to go to UCLA. So I went over, but some pals at Reseda were coming here. Okay, so my best pals. So I went down to UCLA just to walk around, and it's a wonderful school, but it just seemed so big, so intimidating. The classrooms were so big. It seemed like going to a different. I didn't feel at home. Okay, and so I came back over here, and I could walk here. I could I drive here. And it was a beginning. That was a great thing about it. It was a beginning campus. And you had to sit, and it wasn't huge. I think there maybe were 4,000 people, and that was a lot of them were night students. Mostly it was older night students. And it just seemed like an opportunity. And my pals were coming. It felt like home. That's a really nice, it was nice, warm, it was pretty. It was, it seemed like a good alternative. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And I got the spirit walking around. I visited, they had a campus newspaper. I felt I could be part of something right away. I wouldn't have to be competing with all these other people to be on the school paper or anything else they wanted to do. It was a great chance to build and explore, to kind of decide what you want to do in life.
What did it look like? I know what we look like today, and we are big. And I've been here 30 years, so I remember what it looked like in 94 when I started at the university. And when I talk to students now and try to tell them what it looked like, there is a big dramatic difference. But you're talking the late 1950s. What did it
was 1957.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing I can tell you, I mean, if you have to think this, take away 80% of it. And there was probably no building when I came in that was any taller than me. I mean, there were mostly single story. The first big building was the library, but that was maybe 2 or 3 stories. It's probably still there, right?
Well, we have the Oviatt Library that was built in the 70s. You're talking about the original library?
It must have been an original one. Yeah, that must have been an original one. So that was maybe 3 stories. That was like Empire State Building. And so it was very low key. It was mostly single story. It had a cafeteria course, had a basketball gym. It had, the things you want, but it was very, very tiny, and a big parking lot. And again, there was no dormitories. I don't think there was any dormitories. There was almost no, it was almost all adults. It was a community, you lived at home and came here. And it didn't change a lot the whole 4 years I was here. The interesting thing was I was the first class to go all the way through.
Wow.
They graduated people before that, but they were part of Los Angeles State College. And in fact, the book I have here shows.
Oh my God.
This was the 1958 yearbook, okay? And it says San Fernando Valley Campus, Los Angeles State College.
Wow.
Okay. Published by the Associated Students. Now, the next one I found was the 59, the next year. Look at this.
Sure.
San Fernando Valley State College. It had become its own independent thing. I guess it was that transition year when I came here. And so that's what, when did it become a university? When did it become a university?
1972.
Yes, so there was a state college then, and so when our class came here, it was like you walked into a building and there was all these logo sets. You could build whatever you wanted. I mean, I walked into the campus newspaper, and Robert Lawrence, I always call him Mr. Lawrence. Robert Lawrence was a student activities advisor. And I said, "Is this the paper?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, what do you want to do?" Well, because I had been the editor of the paper at Reseda High School, so I began, I think, just writing some stuff. But within 3 months, I was editor of the paper. Look at how far how fast you can advance. The thing that struck me most, and when I look back at this, there was a sense of community. There was the night students who had their world and the day students who had our world. And they were separate things. And as editor of the paper, one of the fun, you had such freedom. I said, look, as editor, I would like to write about things in the real world, not just events on campus, which was kind of unheard of in those days, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, okay, that's fine. So I did things as strange. I did, for the Academy Awards that year, I gave it picking who I thought would win. And I started a question and answer series with famous people. The first one I did, John F. Kennedy.
Wow.
Isn't that great?
Oh, my God.
I mean, because he was a hero. My God, he was like every young person in America just adored. He was like Elvis.
He was still a senator then.
Yes, yeah. This was 1958, right? 58. And he came to town. I was interested in politics. I was thinking of taking a major in politics, political science. And I went down to the Statler Hotel where he was speaking to 2,000 young Democrats. And I walked in and said to somebody, I guess somebody who was asking in charge things, can I get a few words with him for the campus newspaper? And the guy said, no, you can't, he hasn't got time for that, sorry. And then I saw Kennedy in a line. He was walking down a line, shaking hands with people. These might have been representatives of different colleges and so forth or whatever. So I got at the end of the line, okay? And he comes down and he says, hi. And I say, hi, I'm from the Valley State College paper, and I'd love to ask you a few questions. And of course, he's running for it. He says, sure, what is it? And I ask him, how do you feel the chances of the Democrats are taking control of Congress next year? The chances are extremely good, he says. What are your views on a bill allowing 18-year-olds to vote? It's a matter of which should be left up to the individual state, blah, blah, blah. Are you planning to write another book? Because he had written Profiles of Courage. No, not at this time. And we went over and over other questions. And at the end, I said, what's your favorite television show? And he pauses and says, The Thin Man, because his brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, was in it. And he said, because my brother-in-law, but he was so warm and so, he was so great. But look, that appeared in the paper, and it was just a matter, but that's what its spirit. Look, you can do anything. You can go, do this and you can do that. So you could write about book reviews. It was just this thing about unleashing your thing. And the great thing was there were professors who really encouraged you, who gave you a sense that learning is important, that you should pursue it, and inspired you to pursue it, okay? And there are to this day, there's people who, if I go through this book, there was just... people really did change your life. And there were some professors here who really did.
Like who? I mean, in what ways? I have two questions.
Because
who did it, and in what ways?
They inspired you, and they listened to you, and they treated you like education was important, and you had a chance to be somebody if you applied yourself. And they encouraged you, and they were always enthusiastic about what you did and stuff. And one of them, okay. This is faculty in action, and they came from different areas.
Yeah.
I wasn't majoring it, but this guy, Maurice Dance, he really, it made you feel they responded. Not everybody, but the ones that you did connect with made you feel, and they seemed to be trying to do this. They came here because they wanted to be part of something new too. They're very good professors at other universities. Instead of being 10th in line, they would come here and be first or second in line. So I think they had the same sense of, let's do something. Let's make this a special place. Let's encourage students. Let's build this bond with students. And so Maurice Dance, one of my best friends from Reseda High School, he didn't know what he wanted to do. He was kind of going to major in math and so forth. And this guy talked him into going to Michigan, got a scholarship for him, and he got a PhD there, and he became an official of the Treasury Department. And it was because of this guy, Maurice Dance, okay? And he was really helpful to me too, but I didn't know math or this. So then we go over to Dwayne B. Johnson. He was the second journalism professor, not the first, but the second, and he was very encouraging and helpful. And he went on to the LA Times. He worked as an assistant copy editor. And when I wanted to go to the LA Times, he was helpful and recommended me. This is Fred McMahon, Malcolm Sellers, and this man, probably most important of all, Erling Erlandson. He came the second year I was here. He was, I think, second at SC. He was the second in the journalism department. He wanted to be the first somewhere. And he came here, and he was, again, just open, encouraging. He made connections with a local newspaper, the San Fernando Valley Times, to where every year they would take it for the summer, one of our students, and let him be a reporter. Okay, so in my junior year, I became the reporter, and I did well enough to where, after my senior year, they hired me. Okay, but it was through him. They trusted Erlandson. He trusted me. They sent me there, and again, he never said no. How about doing this? Only thing he ever did one time, I misspelled Ernest Hemingway's name, and he caught that, and that was great. But he was wonderful, low-key, never took any sense of bravado. It was always the students who were doing good, not him. He entered us in these state college journalism competitions. We did really well. We beat SC a lot. Which was the dominant paper. We beat them sometimes, and he was never surprised. He said, "No, you can do that. You can all do that." And he just really made you feel special. And he was really a great guy. I mean, fantastic. Okay, and then we go. Dr. Ferguson, political science, Dr. Von Voorhees, political science. But this is the second most important person, Joseph B. Ford. He was from Harvard, a sociologist, very arrogant, this is the most important subject, this is the most important classes you're going to take, blah, blah, blah. He didn't, he was just, but he was great. And he talked me into he encouraged me. Once I got to be student body president, I wanted to do things. I was always looking for trying to do things different. And the basketball team, the PE department spent $7,500 to spend the basketball team to Hawaii. And the student council, I said, why are we, what is this about? Why are we doing, we don't have any books in the library. Why don't we, and it was not a student, it was they paid for it and stuff. But I was just I was very pro-study. When I was the student body president, I got rid of the fraternity. They had a automatic spot on the city council, on the student council, and I threw it off. So just because you're in a fraternity doesn't mean you have a voice in what goes on. You can run for election and then see if you get that. And I even we appointed a committee to study, is there a need for a student government?
Oh my God.
So there were a lot of things like that that we did. But Ford, he said, there was this professor, the number one sociologist in the world, Petrium Sorokin. He was a professor at Harvard. The faculty wanted to bring him out here for 2 weeks, and they only had a certain amount of money. Yeah. And he said, why don't you have a lecture series, and you could pay him for a series of lectures to help pay for the difference. And so he did that, and he came out. He was wonderful. And then so I said, okay, well, let's start a lecture series. So we got Robert Hutchins, who was the president of the Great Books Program. What was the school in Maryland that he was the president of the University of Chicago, very controversial, very well known. We got Steve Allen, who was the host of the Jay Leno show at that time, because he would do it for free. That was part of the thing. we got a lot of politicians to come. They could do it for free. We got Alec Waugh, who was a novelist, brother of Evelyn Waugh.
Wow.
It was doing something different, and I thought something that was academic. And it was unique and stuff, and so again, those things are the things that come back in my mind. What were the opportunities we were given?
Did you know coming to what was then Valley State that you were going to be a journalist, or were you going to be a politician, or were you? I mean,
oh no, I didn't know. The reason I was thinking of majoring in journalism, in English maybe, but I didn't realize there'd be a journalism major. And I thought English would be the easiest thing to get through because I could write well and that kind of stuff. But no, I didn't know. I think it led. It was natural. Again, when I looked back at the program, I was listed. Political science was my major, and journalism was my minor. So, and I was eventually almost went to Washington at one time to be work at Time Magazine doing politics, covering, because I liked Washington. But when I got back there, they took me to lunch, and it was this room full of these people from politics your whole life. It was just suffocating. So I didn't want it to do that. So I came back thinking I would go into journalism as a reporter. Okay, never dreaming I would be a music critic, which was I loved movies and music. I loved them. But I thought, how could you ever get a job doing that? So I was thinking as a reporter. But I don't know what the time was. Maybe the day that they got me the internship and I saw there was actually a job, that you could do.
How did you end up student body president? Oh, you're a political science major, so was it just logical to run for student body president?
No, I was. I get there. Within 3 months, I'm editor of the paper. I see what's going on. There's a student council. I run for representative at large the second year. Okay, and I win that. And then I said, well, gee, I should maybe run for student body president. It was just an adventure. It was just doing something. It was so I ran. So I was a student body president in my junior year. Then I was editor again in the senior year. But I don't think it was with any sense of practicing for political science. It was just, this is interesting. It'd be an interesting thing to do.
I want to ask you, because it's not an opportunity that I get very often to talk to original Matadors. What was it like as a student, knowing that you were a part of something so new at a university? I mean, the stereotype in America is staid and established and elite, but you were on a brand new campus with, I won't say brand new faculty, but faculty who wanted to start something. They were still laying foundations.
Carmen, I think that's the kind of question you can only answer looking. It's the at that time you didn't think of that at all.
Exactly.
You came here. It's close. It seems friendly. My pals are going here. That's it's
exactly.
fun. It's funny. You had no sense of. Again, UCLA. I was going to go after the second year.
Yeah.
But I got so caught up in all this, I thought I didn't want to walk away from all this. But it was not with any sense of brilliant thinking.
But still, you're still associated. You're proudly a Matador. So there must have been some. As you look back on it, do you think you were naive, or it was just so exciting?
I think it was just the easiest thing to do. It made more sense. Again, I could walk there. It was small. My friends were going there. Or I could just say goodbye to my friends. I could take up this big world that seemed overpowering. I could drive across the hill every day. It seemed the most attractive to me. But it wasn't a huge amount of thought. It was so easy. It was so easy to do it. It wasn't like going to somewhere in Midwest to go to school, and you find the school you want to go to and stuff. My affection, it was once I got here, but not before I thought I didn't know what it'd be like. I just hoped it would be okay.
It was more than okay.
No, but it's like you have no idea, but within a few weeks, you could just see the professors were really, some of the professors were really treating you in a way that was invaluable.
What are some of your favorite personal memories at that time here?
I just think it was more than anything else, it was the relationship with the faculty. With they always were telling you something, encouraging you to do something, trying something else. Certainly, one of my favorite things was in the first year at the newspaper, we were so ambitious. We wanted to be so professional that the Los Angeles Times had what they called a preview edition. It came out Tuesday. The Wednesday paper came out Tuesday night. You could pick it up and they would change a few stories for Wednesday morning. Yeah. I said, well, look, the heart of this campus is night school. Why don't we have a preview edition the night? Because it came out, I think, twice a week. Yeah. And so what Erlinson said, okay. I mean, everything was okay. So what we were printing the press, a little press in Northridge, and we stopped to like 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and we put in 2 special stories on the front page for the night students. And then we make 100 copies, let's say, and we run them over here and put them in the boxes. And then the next morning, or after we finish that, we bring over the regular edition and put it there. But I mean, things like that, you just could do anything. And so you were looking for things you could do that were fun and interesting. And this might make sense. It's a night school student body, really. Yeah. So let's address them. So but think how much fun that would be. Again, you had the freedom to do that.
What were the stories you covered, besides interviewing senators who go on to be president?
You mean campus stories?
Yes, campus stories.
Well, sometimes political stories, if the state government was going to change the budgets, a few things like that. But, mostly new admission standards, stories, routine. The stories themselves are usually, that's why I was trying to do things other than that to try to get, it was informational stories more than that. We didn't have crusades or undercover, things like that. We just covered the campus, and then we did a few things that were outside the campus.
When you graduated, how did CSUN prepare you for that next step?
The junior year, they sent me to be an intern at the Valley Times Today, an independent newspaper owned by Look Magazine. And I went over there, and it was so funny. The person who was kind of checking me out gave me a couple press releases, and he said, would you give me 3 or 4 paragraphs in each of these? And so I wrote those up, and then they were in the paper the next day. But no, he said, that's okay. I think it was already understood that because Erlinson recommended me, that they were going to take me. I think they had this agreement: send us a student you think would do well, and we'll take him. So after that, what the big thing was, the next year, as we came down to the end of the year, were they going to hire me or not? Wow, yeah. And they did. And and it was great again because they had a great staff. They had a guy named, one of the people went to the New York Times, Jack Langeth. He covered Vietnam, right?
He was my professor.
Oh, he was great
at USC.
He was my hero. He was the guy I wanted to be. AJ Jack Langeth. Yep. He was fantastic. Another guy becomes city editor of the Chronicle. Another guy goes to the Wall Street Journal. Another goes to another was the son of the people who owned the Baltimore Sun. So it was a class that Look Magazine was trying to develop these people, and I was just happened to be thrown in there. And it was a wonderful place again. Ed Goodpasture, who was the editor, was great. He would let you do things. I started off being a part of the West Valley staff. There were 2 of us. We covered everything Encino West. Okay.
Wow.
Then that guy left. And I became the bureau chief, okay? And then I come into the main office. This is about a year later. I start covering politics, I guess. I was sent downtown to City Hall. I had a little office. I wrote things. I mean, this is like 2 years out of, so I thought it was great. And then I was named education editor, and I won some Valley Press Club awards for stuff. I covered Marilyn Monroe's death. But the funny thing about that is the paper got sold, and it was bought by the Hollywood Citizen News, and it was kind of not a very good thing. So after that, I started looking at ways to get out of this.
Yeah.
And I said, also, I just don't like. I didn't like being a journal reporter, because you had to be on call every day, every hour. You had to get up at midnight, 2 in the morning. If there was a murder, you have to cover that. I remember walking in a room and seeing a body on the phone with on the body on the floor with a knife, when I got back to the paper, they said I looked green. Well, yeah, and then you had to cover water commission meetings, and I didn't understand what was going on. And I remember went to one, and Langeth was there. He was covering it for the New York Times. I said, Jack, what is this about? So I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And so I had been covering the school board for a year, let's say. So their public relations office asked me if I'd like to have a job doing public information, writing speeches for board members, writing press releases, that kind of stuff. And so I look around. I'm married. I have children, and so I say yeah. And I stayed there from, let's say, 60.
LAUSD.
Yeah, LAUSD, yeah. And I wasn't in charge, but I was a member of the staff.
Still,
there were 4 or 5 of us. And then that was probably 64 or 65. I remember Langeth coming over to watch the Beatles on television when they first came out, because I was such a music fan. I was talking about all this kind of stuff. So
Jack Langeth went to your house to watch the Beatles?
Yeah. And he was, we were talking about him. And the funny thing is, I thought the Beatles were fun. I thought they were just doing Elvis and old Sun records. I didn't think they were going to be this amazing. I'd rather see them making records than a lot of the bands that were, but I didn't think they were revolutionary, except they grew. That's what grew. And they grew partially because Bob Dylan wrote those great songs that influenced them, and together they made rock and roll go from a teenage sound to, because teenagers, I was tired of rock and roll by the time I was at the school board. I was looking for other people to listen to. I would buy Sinatra records, Tony Bennett records. I wouldn't buy, because Elvis was in the Army, all this kind of stuff. But I wanted more adult fare instead of talking about teenage heartbreak. And that's what Dylan did. He gave you the subject matter, and that's what saved rock and roll. That's what made it last for 50 years, But but after 3 or 4 years, 64, 65, by the end of 66, I wanted to go back to journalism.
You missed writing.
I missed writing, and I was reading some stories that I thought were really good, and I had originally thought, what is journalism? It's just retelling what other people do. Why don't I do something so people write about me? I never could figure what that would be. But I realized I read some really good stories that were made you think you can make a contribution. You can do interesting things. And so where do you start? I had never written a music review before, except a couple at the school at Reseda High and here. And but I
wait a minute, you started your music criticism career?
I think I must have written one story here, let's say one or two at Reseda High, but nothing significant. Nothing. The stories weren't significant. So I go there and I contact. I noticed the LA Times does not have a full-time pop critic, and so I contact the entertainment. Oh, Dwayne B. Johnson was working there, the person who was the second journalism professor. And I said, who do I talk to? And he said, you talk to Charles Champlin, who was the film critic, okay? And I went there and I said, look, I'd like to do music reviews about rock and roll. And he said, well, we have somebody already doing that. He does 2 stories a week. There wasn't much sense that rock and roll was important. Yeah. When the Beatles played the Hollywood Bowl, the LA Times sent a teenager to cover it because they thought only teenagers would be interested in it, okay? So this is 66, and I say, well, what if I wrote about country music? Because I like country and R&B. And he says, well, why country music in L.A., that's something for the South, isn't it? I said, no. Country sells more records in California than it does in Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama combined. But the key thing was he had gotten a note from Ed Goodpaster, who was the person who was the editor of the Valley Times today. He had become the news editor of Time magazine. Chuck had been in part of Time magazine.
Yeah.
He knew Ed. Ed wrote the nicest. He says, "You're going to bless the day you found this guy. This guy is terrific." Blah 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 blah. You know, and that's what I think he sensed. He wanted to give me a chance. So he said, "Okay, well, go do that." And he said, "Why don't you find a couple stories you want to do as samples?" And so I went up to Folsom Prison and covered Johnny Cash.
You're kidding me.
No, this was 1968 now. But again, I was always looking for stories to do for him. I was doing a lot of reviews, small reviews, and I had reviewed Cash and I had met Cash. And I heard he was going to do this concert, not from the record company, but from a disc jockey. The record company did not want to publicize that concert because they had tried to do another prison concert with Johnny Cash, and he showed up so stoned they couldn't do it. And they didn't want to get more bad publicity, so they didn't, don't tell anybody about this. So I went up and covered it, and I came back and wrote a story, and that album did so well that they said, well, I think this guy knows what he's doing. And the second story was I covered Janis Joplin of Profile at the Hollywood Bowl. And it was the easiest story to write because she was so colorful and theatrical and fantastic. And I got a note from Jim Bellows, who was the head of all the entertainment stuff. I think you ought to come in now and talk about it coming full time. So it was those like two steps, you know. And people, Carmen, forever after that would ask, "How do I get a job doing this?" And you can't replicate that.
Yeah.
You know, it was going to school, getting the support of the professors, them influence you, them recommending you to some paper, then recommending you some other paper, then having the guy know. I mean, he never asked for a sample of a music review. And the first ones I did, I was really timid. I didn't know what you're supposed to say. How are you supposed to write for a eventual million circulation paper, you know? And David Geffen, who was a big guy in the entertainment business, he was managing Joni Mitchell and Neil Young then. He said, "Just write about great talent. You know, do cover other people, but focus on the great talent. Write as many stories as you can." And that became my philosophy. I would always want to write about Springsteen or Dylan or Joni Mitchell or Stevie Wonder. And then I'd let other people I'd sign the other stories because those are the people who are shaping music, who eventually you're going to care about, and I was more excited about and stuff like that. But all those things coming together, I really learned on the job, is what I'm saying. That was fantastic.
But how do you know? How do you know what great talent is? You could get three critics and they would all disagree on who's a great talent. You have to see. When I was born in Louisiana, Natchitoches, Louisiana, which was the town that the Sweet Magnolias movie was based on. Okay, and my uncle loved country music and blues, and I'd go to his room as a little boy, watching and listening to Hank Williams and these different people. And it meant so much to him, these songs. And I would go downstairs, and my grandparents were listening to Bing Crosby and the pop stars of the day, good artists. But I always wondered, why was he so into downstairs? It was just background and entertainment. And it took me years before I realized that he had epilepsy, and he was kind of the black sheep of the family. They didn't want him around because he might have a seizure. And so he was up there listening to these records. And these guys spoke to him because these country and blues artists were talking about misery and pain and isolation and rejection. And it eventually, that shaped my whole view of music. I wanted an artist that spoke about real subjects, not just entertainment. I mean, you would like a record like by ABBA once in a while, but you wanted somebody who's... And that's what Dylan did. Dylan changed. See, before Dylan,
Most every songwriter wrote for movies and Broadway. They weren't telling their story. They were telling about characters in these movies. And Woody Guthrie tells Dylan, you got to write what you know, what you care about. And then Dylan did that. And the Beatles see that, and they changed their writing. Neil Young sees it. Joni Mitchell sees it. Paul Simon. That becomes the sound. That's why it was the voice of America for 50 years.